Howdy, folks. Welcome back. Hope you had an excellent weekend. Today's Monday, May the 2nd, and we are going to be wrapping up our review for the open ended essay, or the literary argument essay, as it's sometimes called, prior to taking the exam on the 4th. Okay, so May the 4th, we're going to be taking the exam. Today is Monday, and we're going to be wrapping up our conversation about the open ended essay. Okay, so a quick review of where we've come so far in our preparation for the exam. We've talked about the multiple choice section, its structure, approaches to passage, approaches to the questions, common errors, the solution to those errors. We've talked about the free response section, what to expect, how long it will be, 2 hours, what kind of prompts are going to be there, 2 close readings and 1 literary argument essay, how much time you'll have for each task, 40 minutes, of course. The skills necessary, which are available to you on the course description, which is attached or has been attached on RenWeb throughout many days. We talked about the prose close analysis task, what it is that you need to do, linking what a text says with how the text uses language to construct its meaning. We've talked about developing close reading ability, right? Some actionable steps that you can take to develop those close reading skills using your glossary and context lecture slides. Okay, we've talked about how you're going to be evaluated on the rubric, right? We've talked about the components of the close prose analysis prompts, the language that you can anticipate, the task that they always are assigning, the writing process, the reading process, how to respond to these things most effectively. Okay, we've also talked about the poetic close analysis, which is very, very similar, except for it's just a different manner of discourse, right? Poetry as opposed to prose. Talked about close reading, the actionable steps you can take to develop your skills as a poetic close reader, right, which is a little bit different than a prose close reader, but intimately related in many ways. We've talked about how your writing is going to be scored. Again, that same rubric. We've talked about some examples of prompts. Hopefully, you've looked at that 2018 prompt about the plants, right? We've talked about how you should attack the prompt, right? Reading, analyzing, establishing an interpretive claim, and an analytical line of reasoning. Outlining that essay, okay, just jotting out and establishing that line of reasoning graphically for yourself on your prompt, and then of course, the writing process, okay, transitioning into your close readings and citing language that creates meaningful impressions, and then commenting on how that language develops or links up with your general interpretation of the passage, transitioning into your next supporting paragraphs, approaching the poem in chunks, making sense out of stanzas and structure. How many body paragraphs should you have? More than one, but less than, I don't know, four, right? We've considered some sample essays. Hopefully you did that after class on Thursday, as I asked you to do. And then last class, on Friday, we talked about the literary argument, okay? The task, okay, which is going to involve reading how the prompt introduces an element of a piece of literature, identifying what that element is, and then linking it up with how that element, right, illuminates the meaning of the work as a whole. We looked at examples from past prompts. Okay, we talked about the abilities that you need and the kind of knowledge that you need. Boy, do you ever need to master a number of long literary works, okay? Lear, Grapes of Wrath, Gatsby, Ethan Frome, okay? These are great places to start, and I highly recommend that you have all of those texts under your belt, mastered, the details, backwards and forwards, the character settings, narrative structures, perspectives, patterns of imagery, and symbols, and that, of course, you know how to write an analytical interpretive essay, okay? Now, the literary argument is not say, close analysis essay because you don't have a text in front of you, but you should have a text in mind, okay? You should have all kinds of textual details in mind that you can use in your evidence in your essay as evidence, and then you can comment on and explain the meaning of. We talked about the rubric. We've talked about the structure of the prompt. We've talked about the writing process that you ought to undergo, an example thesis, right, that responds to one of these prompts. And today, all right, part two of our preparation for the literary argument is just going to feature some more prompt exposure. Okay, we're going to look at a number of past AP prompts okay, we're going to identify the literary element that needs to be analyzed in each prompt, okay? So this is going to be actually pretty fun, okay? So we're going to look at some of these prompts in the past, identify the literary element, and then begin considering consciously how we might respond to it with a work that we know, okay? After we look at the prompt, we're going to consider what work we know best that we can use to answer that prompt. And the dominant impression that I want you to take away from our sort of prompt exposure is that the text that we have studied can work well for all of these prompts if you know the text well and if you can think flexibly about them, okay, and link them up, or link these various sorts of literary elements in the prompt up to the text that you know's literary significance or its thematic meaning, right? Then we're going to scrutinize some sample essays, okay, and we'll get to that at the end of our time today, okay? First, I'd like for you to simply, if you go to RenWeb, all right, and you click on the documents that I have attached here, you're going to see a number of attachments, and one of them is called the 12E Open-Ended Samples from 1970 to 2019. Okay, so Miss Effie, hero of AP Literature, whoever that is, right? She's out there doing the Lord's work for AP Literature, has compiled a list of all the literary argument questions all the way back from 1970. Okay, so some of these prompts are a little bit antiquated. That the prompts, the contemporary prompts, don't work exactly like they have in the past, but the general sort of logic of them pretty much holds true. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of select one of these prompts at random. All right, and let's just see what the literary element is in question, and see if we can't think about the work that we know best that we can use to answer this prompt with. Okay, so let's go 2002 Form B. All right, so often in literature, a character's success in achieving goals depends on keeping a secret and divulging it only at the right moment, if at all. Choose a novel or play of literary merit that requires a character to keep a secret. Okay, so there's your literary element. It's kind of an interesting one. A character who is operating secretly. All right. Well, think. Right. What text that you know well features characters who are keeping significant secrets, or who are or not revealing everything about themselves all at once through the course of the text. In a well-organized essay, briefly explain the necessity for secrecy and how the character's choice to reveal or keep the secret affects the plot. Don't worry about this language. You're not going to see that in a contemporary prompt. That would throw a lot of students for a loop. Affects the plot. What do we mean by that? But here's what we always need to focus on, and contributes to the meaning of the work as a whole. Okay, so what's our literary element? We've already established it. A character that keeps a secret. What are we going to do with that character who is keeping a secret? We're going to analyze the motives, the necessity for that secrecy, and how that character's choice to reveal or keep the secret, whatever occurs in the text, affects the meaning of the work as a whole. All right, so you can choose a work from the list below. Well, we don't have a list below. Why not? Because the list doesn't really matter. All right, what matters is the text that you know best. All right, so what text are you thinking that you would respond to this just random prompt with? Well, if it's me, I'm definitely thinking about Kent or Edgar from King Lear, right? What are those? What sort of secrets are those characters keeping? Well, throughout the course of the narrative, Kent holds a kind of secret, his identity. All right, he serves Lear in disguise. He serves Lear in a secret, if you will. Okay, so we have to think just a little bit flexibly about that, but that's not too far of a stretch. Okay, Kent is a kind of secret keeper. And he chooses to keep the secret of his identity throughout the course of the plot for for reasons that are needful and are connected to his character's overarching motive, right? The patient and humble pursuit of the good of the realm and the good of his king, uh, even in the midst of his misunderstanding and misjudgment, all right, by those around him, particularly the king he is serving, who has banished him, who has mistreated him deeply. Okay, what about Edgar? Okay, Edgar can work just as well, right? The secret of Edgar's identity, okay, his acceptance of his humbled position to patiently work for the good of the realm and for the good of his father, Gloucester, who has harmed him. How does that connect to the meaning of the work as a whole? Well, what is Lear all about on a thematic level? It's about life in the reality of a depraved world. What does it look like to live and encounter and pursue the good in the midst of a depraved world wherein misjudgment, mistreatment is the rule and not the exception? Well, it means that people who do good often have to do so uh, uh, within the context of a kind of secret keeping, okay? The secret of their identity, the secret of their intentions. They perhaps have to accept the reality of being misunderstood, misapprehended, right? Kent choosing life in the stocks instead of the life of a privileged gentleman, okay? So again, this I don't necessarily have a thesis yet, but I'm certainly gesturing towards that as I'm just thinking through this prompt. And I mean, it's just a random prompt here, but boy, I feel like I've already got plenty in my arsenal if I know the plot and the characters and the details of King Lear well. I feel like I've already got that in the bag. Okay, so let's look at say let's look at another one, okay? Well, what about just 2003? Why not? Okay. According to critic Northrop Frye, tragic heroes are so much the highest points in their human landscape that they seem the inevitable conductors of the power about them. Great trees, more likely to be struck by lightning than a clump of grass. Conductors may, of course, be instruments as well as victims of the divisive lightning. Select a novel or play in which a tragic figure, okay, so what's the literary element in question here? A tragic figure. Well, I'm certainly excited to see that if I'm taking this exam because my teacher, Mr. Dale, can't barely teach a text that isn't horribly tragic, right? That isn't about some sort of tragic figure. I've been reading these texts since day one of high school English at Redeemer. Okay, so I've got all kinds of tragic figures in mind here, and I've got a bunch that are fresh on my mind, like Lear, like Gatsby, like Frome, like Ethan Frome, right? And what is this tragic figure going to do? He's going to function as an instrument of the sufferings of others. Write an essay in which you explain how the suffering brought upon others by that figure contributes to the tragic vision of the work as a whole. Now, don't get tripped up by this sort of fancy language in the end, the tragic vision of the work as a whole. Well, what does that mean? Well, it just means the meaning of the tragedy as a whole, the thematic meaning, the vision or perspective offered to us by the tragedy. Okay, so what work am I going to use? All right, well, I'm immediately thinking about the extent to which Lear, as a tragic figure, and his tragic hamartia, his misunderstanding of himself, his overestimation of his place in the world, of his ability to judge reality in a stable way, leads to suffering for lots of other people, okay? Namely, say, Cordelia. Another person who suffers on account of Lear is, of course, Kent, my favorite character of all time. Another character who suffers on account of Lear is the Fool, who we didn't talk that much about in class, but that's okay. If you know Lear inside and out, then you also know something about the Fool. His entire kingdom, of course, suffers. Even his unfaithful daughters suffer because of his misjudgment. Now, they suffer a more just penalty because of their licentiousness, but indeed they suffer as recipients of his poor fathering as well. Right, the sins of the father are passed to the son, well, to the daughter in this scenario. So, how does that contribute to Shakespeare's quote tragic vision or the meaning of the work as a whole. Well, what is that work as a whole about? Well, again, life in the reality is a drama. It's a dramatization of life in the reality of a depraved world. Okay, and one of the elements, the horrible elements of life in the reality of a depraved world, is that one does not simply pay the penalty of their own miscalculations and misjudgments, but of others, okay, including importantly those who are in authority over others, like say, I don't know, kings, okay, or men of power, fathers. Okay, so boy, does Lear ever work for this prompt again? All right, so even if I just have Lear under my belt, man, I'm 2 for 2. I'm batting 1,000, and I'm feeling really, really good. Okay, let's just look at another one. Okay, a symbol. 2009. A symbol is an object, action, or event that represents something or that creates a range of associations beyond itself. Okay, thank you for that useful definition of what a symbol is. All right, you should already know that. In literary works, a symbol can express an idea, clarify meaning, or enlarge literal meaning. Select a novel or play and focusing on one symbol, write an essay analyzing how that symbol functions in the work and what it reveals about the characters or theme of the work as a whole. Okay, so again, don't get caught up in the language of the prompt, right? Don't get confused. What is it asking you to do? It's asking you to identify a symbol, a literary element. Boy, this is a very open one, right? Any literary element that is symbolic in nature, to analyze that symbol's meaning and explain how that symbol relates to the meaning of the work as a whole. Okay, so what are some symbols, some symbolic objects, some symbolic events or actions that represent something larger than themselves in a work that you have spent some time with? Okay, you might think, if you're Cameron and you are, of course, a socialist, right? You might think about Weed Patch, the Weed Patch Camp, as a symbolic place, right? A symbolic place that symbolizes something about Steinbeck's ideal political system, an ideal kind of community, an ideal value system. Okay, you're gonna have to know the details of Steinbeck's description of that place to write a good essay about it. But boy, does it fit in nicely. You could talk about the symbolic event of the storm in Act 3 of King Lear. Okay, you could talk about the symbolic event of Ethan Frome's attempted suicide that he could not fully commit to because he is tethered to his duty and tethered by his shame. Okay, there's all kinds of symbolism in The Great Gatsby, including, of course, the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg, right, sort of hovering over the ashen landscape, symbolizing the sort of emptiness of the promise, the ideal promise that the world is just, and that somebody, like maybe God or some other authority figure, is watching over us and going to bring justice to the world. Well, Fitzgerald doesn't seem to believe that that's going to happen. All right, so the works that we've dealt with, boy, do they ever fit into that? I mean, I think you could probably write that essay about any book worth its weight, maybe ever. Okay, all right. How about 2010? Okay, you can leave home all you want, but home will never leave you, says a woman whose first name I'm not going to try and pronounce, whose last name is Tate. I can say Tate. Tate's statement suggests that home may be conceived of as a dwelling, a place, or a state of mind. It may have positive or negative associations, but in either case, it may have a considerable influence on an individual. Choose a novel or play in which a central character, okay, so here's our literary element, a central character leaves home. Okay, so the character is going to have to leave this home state of mind or this actual home place or this dwelling place, and yet finds that home remains significant. You're supposed to write a well-developed essay in which you analyze the importance of home to this character, what their home is. All right, so analyze how that's represented in the text, and the reasons for its continuing influence. All right, explain how the character's idea of home illuminates the larger meaning of the work. Okay, so uh, what work immediately springs to mind for me? Okay, a work with home or as a sort of state of mind and also a place that exerts a really important and definitive influence over a character that leaves it, some central character. Well, I'm thinking old Tom Joad in The Grapes of Wrath, right? Why not? Okay, what is home for old Tom Joad? Well, it's this sort of agrarian, individualist, American, patriarchal state of mind that is the basis of his identity, that he is the father of a nuclear family, and that it is his responsibility and right to provide for that family alone, all right, on his own piece of land, disconnected from the help and cooperation of other individuals and in authority, definitive authority over his family. Well, this state of mind, home for old Tom Joad, is knocked off its foundation in the that's a quote from the novel. Right? Knocked off. A tractor comes by, and knocks the hell out of it. Right. And it's never. And old Tom Joad is just never quite the same. He can't leave this home behind. And despite his perhaps efforts to do so in the Route 66 section of the novel, Ma emerges as the primary leader of the family simply because Pa Joad, old Tom Joad, just cannot adapt. He cannot progress. And then there's, of course, the tragic end of Pa Joad's character arc, wherein his sort of final defeat by the flood, the waters of the flood, that he cannot stop no matter how hard he tries. To sort of provide for the safety of his daughter, Rose of Sharon, as she's giving birth, right? No matter how hard he tries, he just simply cannot do it. And this crushes old Tom Joad, and it crushes the state of mind, right, that he associates with home, his identity. Okay, so tragic end for old Tom Joad, but indeed a good way of answering this prompt. And how does that connect to Steinbeck's larger meaning or thematic meaning? Well, the whole novel is about the importance of evolution, adaptation, and progress with respect to one's state of mind and values in order to survive. Right? Why does Pa Joad not flourish in California? Because he cannot progress. He can't leave his home behind, right? Jim Casey, once a man gets used to a way of thinking, it's hard to leave. Okay, even that comment sort of associates a way of thinking with a place, with a home. Okay, so Grapes of Wrath, a terrific book for that particular prompt. What about 2013? And let's make this our last one. Okay, a Bildungsroman or coming of age novel recounts the psychological or moral development of its protagonist from youth to maturity, when this character recognizes his or her place in the world. Select a single pivotal moment in the psychological or moral development of the protagonist of a Bildungsroman. Okay, so never fear if you're not, if you see this weird word, Bildungsroman or Bildungsroman, however you want to pronounce it, it just means a coming of age novel. And boy, have you read a lot of coming of age sorts of fiction, because your teacher, right, happens to be obsessed with pilgrimage fiction. Okay, it's probably my favorite sort of book, right? Heart of Darkness, Canterbury Tales, Inferno, all this stuff. Coming of age fiction or pilgrimage fiction. Okay, so what's our literary element? It is a single pivotal moment in that coming of age process. Okay, so what character could we select that undergoes a kind of a coming of age experience throughout the course of a narrative, and can we select a single pivotal moment in that process? Well, this prompt is a little bit challenging because it's going to require you to really understand and know the details of that single pivotal scene. All right. So who's a character that operates like this? Well, again, Jim Casey, springs to mind as one of the protagonists of the Grapes of Wrath. Grapes of Wrath is a really rangy novel with more than one sort of central fighter or protagonist or central character. So you could definitely write an essay about Jim Casey. And what would a definitive moment in his development be? It would be the moment wherein he, with a sort of vague smile of triumph on his face, takes on the penalty or the imprisonment that is supposed to be Tom Joad's. Okay, he actually doesn't just talk; he begins to walk in light of this new progressive, humanistic, transcendental gospel that he's been discovering and preaching along or throughout the course of the novel. That would be a pretty good one for me, or Tom Joad, of course, in The Culvert after he emerges kind of new man and has that really important conversation with Ma Joad in which he starts talking a lot like Jim Casey. He seems to be a kind of reincarnation of Jim Casey and becomes this sort of transcendent figure of workers' rights and the man who works for unity, this sort of proletarian struggler. Okay, again, there are a lot of characters that function this way. You could even write this essay about Lear. Okay, you say, well, he's not young, he's old. Yeah, but he is the very definition of an immature man with internally, psychologically, and morally. Okay, you could talk about how that plot exposes him to the reality, a mature understanding of the reality of life in a depraved world, wherein he doesn't have the safety of kingship, wherein he doesn't have the safety of the crown, wherein he is out on the heath. Okay, you could analyze Act 3, right, as a terrific pivotal moment in his psychological or moral development. Okay, so what the whole point of I don't want to belabor this, and you can spend some more time with these prompts if you like. I find it kind of fun to think through them. I think it's a good old time. But if I think the point that I'm trying to make overall, right, is that the text that we've studied, they can work for these prompts. The texts that the texts that we've studied are incredibly rangy. That's why they tend to be taught in AP literature. That's why I've selected them. Okay, they tend to feature the sorts of literary elements that are cited in these prompts, and you can connect them. If you know those works' dominant themes, right? Their dominant impressions, their dominant concerns, a range of those dominant concerns. They can easily be connected with them. Now, the important factor here is that you can describe and analyze these literary elements in detail in a series of analytical body paragraphs wherein you are discussing the sort of progression of a character or the development of a symbol or something of that nature. Okay, so let's, again, all the more reason to study those long works. Master their details. All right, so let's scrutinize some sample essays. All right, so first, let's look at the 2019 prompt, and then we'll look at a sample essay that responds to it, one that is good and one that is tragically very not good. All right, so in his 2004 novel Magic Seeds, V.S. Naipaul, I don't know, writes, "It is wrong to have an ideal view of the world." I'm pretty sure I gave this to you on your midterm, or at least I have before to some groups of students. That's where the mischief starts. That's where everything starts unraveling. Select a novel, play, or epic poem in which a character holds a, quote, ideal view of the world. Okay, well, Gatsby is, of course, jumping off the page. And he even made the list. So did Lear. Okay, I wonder if they're referencing Cordelia or Lear himself. I guess it depends on how you read the play. Then write an essay in which you analyze the character's idealism and its positive or negative consequences. Explain how the author's portrayal of this idealism illuminates the meaning of the work as a whole. Okay, so we're going to have to analyze a character with an ideal view of the world. Okay, so we're going to have to take the measure of their idealism, like describe its progression, its nature, how it shapes their actions or decisions as a character throughout the course of the narrative. That's what is meant by these positive or negative consequences. Okay, the sort of course or effect of their idealism, and then connect that character's characterization as an idealist to the meaning of the work as a whole. All right, so I'm going to read you some sections of a sample essay about Lord of the Flies. If you've never read this book, that's all right. Just look at the components of the essay. If you have read this book, then maybe this will make a lot of sense to you. All right, so I want you to note some things that this author does well. First, he's going to, or she's going to, establish a thesis that answers the prompt. He or she is going to get that first point for sure. Then I want you to notice how they cite relevant textual examples, right, and details without summarizing the narrative. Okay, they're not retelling the story; they're citing relevant textual details and then developing interpretive commentary that explains the significance of those textual details. The student's going to do this in a really well-developed way and therefore is going to get all four of the evidence and commentary points. And then finally, I want you to note how the student connects his interpretation of the text to a kind of broader context, right? Namely, political systems or overly idealistic political systems. The one that he identifies as overly idealistic is, direct democracy. Okay, so let's look at the example. Oftentimes, when coming from a well-off upbringing, an individual develops an idealistic viewpoint of the world. He or she may believe humans to be innately good or government to be innately focused on the well-being of all. In his novel, Lord of the Flies, author William Golding presents readers with one such individual whose view of the world is too ideal to be true. Okay, so a little bit of an awkward turn of phrase, but remember, this is a draft. It's all good. A young British boy named Ralph. All right, so Ralph is the protagonist of the novel Lord of the Flies, and he is indeed an idealistic young man. When an airplane crashes, leaving a group of boys stranded on an island, Ralph believes that he can help bring the boys' rescue as long as the others cooperate. He soon finds out, however, that his plan is too optimistic. Okay, so he's too idealistic. Through his character, Ralph, Golding conveys that holding, so here is the sort of interpretation of thematic meaning. Golding conveys something, right? So the author is conveying something on a thematic level, all right, that we can discern and interpret. That holding an idealistic view of the world is what? Is dangerous. Colon. Oh, wow, that's a sophisticated use here. Everything that follows here is going to modify the ways in which it's dangerous. Right. While temporary success can be achieved, it ultimately leads to destruction of governmental institutions and chaos. He, meaning Golding, encourages readers to adopt a more realistic view of the world and recognize the inherent evil in all people. So, not far off from maybe a pretty simple interpretation of Fitzgerald's aims in The Great Gatsby. All right, so adopting a realistic view of the world and recognizing that institutions ought to be built with inherent evil in mind, okay, or the sort of evil intent in mind. Checks, balances, institutions that perhaps stop that or check that. Okay, so let's look at this first paragraph. Okay, by the way, right? Does this answer the prompt? Yes, of course. Does it connect to a larger thematic reading? Yes, of course. Okay, so we're doing real good. From the start, Ralph believes that he can create a direct democracy on the island that can ultimately bring the boys safely. All right, so this sort of topics and it introduces that the student's going to be talking about textual details from the start, the exposition of the novel. Shortly after the plane crash, Ralph and his friend Piggy find a conch shell on the beach, and Ralph, calling together the group, designates the conch shell as possessing special power. In particular, whoever holds the conch may speak, whoever does not cannot. It is this conch, then, that becomes a symbol of democracy on the island. Okay, so here's some interpretive commentary, right? The conch as symbol of democracy. okay, as expression of Ralph's idealistic view of the sort of ability of the boys on the island to govern themselves, right, in rational ways. At first, Ralph's plan seems to work. Using the conch shell to exert his leadership, he instructs the group to build a signal fire on the island so that passing ships can see it and come rescue the boys. Ralph, moreover, instructs the kids to build huts, collect water for the group, and lays out a number of ground rules concerning urinating and other matters. Okay, so pretty good. Public safety, public health. Ralph believes in his plan. Ralph's belief in his plan is based on his ideal view of the world. Okay, so again, more interpretive commentary here. It's based on his ideal view of the world. Specifically, he believes, or Ralph believes, her believes, I don't know why her is there, but he believes that the boys, being good, rational beings, okay, that's his idealistic hope here, the boys are going to be good, the boys are rational, will follow the rules and help maintain the signal fires. Ralph also assumes that his democracy is somehow perfect and that all its members will cooperate. Okay, so what did the student do here? I don't necessarily want you to know anything about the Lord of the Flies after this, although it's a good book and you should read it. But I want you to see the structure of the paragraph, right? Note that the student is talking about stuff that Ralph and Piggy do in the text. You have to interpret the text. You got to probably talk about what's going on in it to a certain level. But all of his references to the text are linked to interpretive commentary, okay, that he's making meaning out of and connecting all of these examples in interpretive commentary to the prompt and to his thesis. Okay, so this is not a paragraph that merely summarizes or narrates. It's a paragraph that is citing textual examples and then making meaningful observations about them. Okay, talking about or commenting on their significance. Okay, so let's read, say, this last paragraph. It's only near the end of the novel when the worst consequences of Ralph's naivety are in broad display. At this point, Ralph has virtually lost all his boys, who have instead run to Jack, who promises to provide food to the kids and laughs at the prospect of maintaining a signal fire. Okay, so this is a pretty crazy part of the story. They just stop worrying about getting saved. Anyways, whatever. Jack, who demonizes members of his, quote, government with physical violence. This is a misuse of that word, demonizes. I think the word there should be intimidates members of his government with physical violence. Symbolically embodies a dictator. Okay, so there's some interpretive commentary for you, indicating that Ralph's idealistic direct democracy collapses to the will of a dictatorship. I'd like for the student to analyze why that is the case and connect it to Golding's perspective, but he doesn't, or she doesn't, and that's okay, because the student is doing some interpreting, and this is, after all, a draft. But that's the note that I would give them if I were their teacher or reader. Furthermore, one of Jack's sadistic companions named Roger rolls a boulder off a cliff, killing both Piggy, Ralph's best friend, and shattering the conch into 1,000,000 pieces. The death of Piggy shows the demise of good, Piggy, in the face of evil, Roger, while the shattering of the conch shell shows the complete dissolution of Ralph's democracy on the island. Literally and symbolically, evil triumphs over good by the novel's end, and Ralph's optimistic hopes become a bitter reality, or perhaps give way to a bitter reality of life in a depraved world. Okay, so in William Golding's Lord of the Flies, an optimistic, ideal view of the world is exposed by Ralph. Okay, so in other words, Ralph is characterized as a person who has this sort of thing, and he believes that a direct democracy and cooperation can bring the boys off the island. It'll save them, that they'll do the right thing. When the boys gradually turn away from Ralph and towards Jack, destroying democracy and killing people in the process, the reader comes to understand the negative side of Ralph's optimism. Ralph's ideal view of the world makes his plan extremely precarious, and is bound to fail from the beginning. The end result is nothing but violence, destruction of his government, and chaos. Golding, therefore, look, I want you to understand why the reader is going to be so encouraged by this essay. Okay, the student is linking back in his conclusion to this sort of the overarching thematic meaning that Golding has been developing, right? Golding therefore urges readers, like his audience, or people who are being exposed to the meaning of this novel, right, to accept the faults of humanity and the fact that no person or institution is perfect. In doing so, they can begin to create governments that stand strong and plans that work well. So I suppose the essay begs the question: well, what sorts of governments are those? But that's not exactly the question that the student needs to answer in the prompt. Okay, so how has this student done with respect to all the elements of the rubric? Okay, well, if you look at the scoring commentary for this actual student's essay given to them by their reader, you'll find that the student is going to get all 6 points, right? It does respond with a defensible thesis. Yay, good for them. It does include well-chosen specific details from the novel and connects them consistently through commentary to the thesis. It does that quite well. It wins all 4 of those points, and it wins the sophistication point. Why? Because it recognizes the complexity of Ralph's idealism, namely that it works for a period of time, but it sort of is ultimately overcome by the boy's depravity or attraction to evil. And it situates the novel in a kind of broader context, like national governmental systems, like direct democracy or totalitarian dictatorships and stuff like that. Okay, so the student has succeeded on pretty much every level here. All right, so I'm going to let you go in just a second, but I want to look at one example, a tragic example of someone just not doing this at all. All right, so in Khaled Hossein, I can never remember exactly how to say that guy's last name, right? A novel, The Kite Runner, which I've read, but it's been quite a while. I can't say I remember many of the details. I certainly wouldn't write an essay about it. But that's all right. This student seems to be confident, right? The Kite Runner. The reader follows the life of a boy named Amir and how his actions and view of life will affect him as an adult. All right, my friend. This does not answer the prompt at all. All right. Perhaps the student is just assuming that we know that Amir is idealistic, and that but the student has not made no claims about Amir's idealism, no claims about its positive or negative consequences, and has not connected Amir's idealism to the Kite Runner's thematic meaning in general. Okay, so no good for this student. Sorry. And then sadly, it continues to be pretty bad. All right. When Amir was a young boy, he has his best friend named Hassan, who was just a servant boy. But Amir didn't care at the time. Okay, what is this student doing? I'm not going to read all this to you, but the student is just simply narrating the novel. Okay, it's just kind of retelling what happens in the text, and not interpreting any of the meaning of any of these textual details. Okay, the student breaks the paragraph and then picks up where he left off. Right, it's like chapter 2. Okay, and he starts summarizing the plot some more, and so this essay is a bit of it's a bit sad. Okay, because it doesn't have a thesis. All right, and that makes an essay sad, and it doesn't have any textual evidence or details that are connected to interpretive commentary. So this student gained no points on the rubric. Tragically, okay. Tragically, this student gained no points on this section of the exam. All right, so we don't want to do this. Okay, we want to write thesis statements that answer the prompt. All right, we want to write body paragraphs that are packed and stuffed with textual details that you are commenting on, connecting to the prompt, connecting to your thesis. Okay, if you do that, you will be awarded with all the points on this rubric. If you do not, if you simply narrate plot events, then you simply will not. Okay, so that's all that I have to say today. Okay, I wanted to sort of expose you to some more prompts. All right, if you want to look at some more of those after this video ends and just kind of toy around with them and think about them, then feel free. If you have any questions about prompts, like you see one, you say, I cannot answer that prompt, and now I'm afraid. Let's talk about it when I return tomorrow, and we'll try and make some sense out of it and see what we could do about it. Okay? So, have an excellent day. I'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll be wrapping up our review, and we'll be charging in to the exam on Wednesday. All right. Have an excellent day, my friends.